A couple of announcements. Talked about this last week in your bulletin now. We're giving out a free email devotional, and I just want to encourage you that if you don't already have this habit, one of the best things you could do for your walk with the Lord is to begin the habit of daily Bible reading. And that could be really intimidating, right? Because you look in the Bible and it's like, I don't really know what it's saying half the time. And honestly, I feel the same way a lot of times. And so what I really believe in is that if you're starting on ground zero with that habit, the best way for you to start, and maybe even something that would be the best way for you to continue in that habit, is to get some sort of devotional. And a devotional is helpful because it'll give you a scripture and give you an explanation. It lays it all out for you. Your job is just to read it and apply it. And I'll just tell you, especially for a lot of us church-going folks in here, that you can grow to a certain extent in church, and I think the slope is a little slower, but when you add daily Bible reading into that equation, personal opinion, I think even biblical fact, you're going to help your growth. You're going to increase the steepness of that growth, and there was a time in my life where that wasn't a part of my habits, where daily Bible reading wasn't a practice of mine as a younger man. And I'm just telling you, when you add in daily Bible reading, listen now, it will dramatically help your walk with the Lord. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're like, hey, I've never done that before, go to fellowshipgardencity.com, just plug in your email or your name and your phone number, and we will send that to you 14 days in a row. It's automated, 6:30 a.m. It'll be in your email inbox. And then that'll get you kick-started, and then there's a lot of options to go from there. And so I want to encourage you to do that. Alrighty? And then don't forget about our Ladies' Bible Study. That's January 28th at 6:30. And then our missions month is going to kick off on February 6th. This is a really big deal. I would say this is going to be one of the biggest events on our church calendar every year. It's has always been this church's heartbeat to support worldwide missions, and really this month of February, at least the first 3 weeks, we really want to emphasize and really exhort you to get involved in that in a sacrificial way when it comes to giving. And we're going to be reminded of what our missionaries are doing on the field. Each week we're going to have some sort of virtual or in-person presentation from a missionary. So we'll have some of our veteran missionaries that we've supported for a long time report to us via video. And then on the 13th, I've just confirmed this, we have missionary Noah Wilkerson to Mozambique and his family. That'll be with us on the morning of the 13th. They have another church in the area on the evening. But Mozambique is an incredibly unreached area of the world. It's not the matter of, well, where's the closest Baptist church? It's where's the closest anybody who preaches the gospel church, if any. I mean, it's very unreached, and people who've never heard the gospel one time. And so Brother Wilkerson's going there, and so I'm excited to host them on the 13th. And then on the 20th, we'll have another virtual presentation from a missionary, and we'll be preaching on missions and missions giving that whole month. Especially in the morning services. And so I hope you'll be here those 3 weeks. And then on February 20th is when we're going to take up our missions commitments. And that's going to set our budget for the next year on how many missionaries we can support and things like that. And so I hope you'll be involved there and be praying about that even now. Be looking at your budget even now, how you can sacrifice and take part in that. And then, men, I want to invite you to sign up to go to the Amen Conference, which is March 11th through 12th. That sign-up sheet is there at that back table where the offering plates normally sit. And if you could just at least write your name down if you are planning to go. There's 2 ways for you to pay that registration fee. You can drop that in the offering plates. I couldn't think of the word. And just make sure you designate that. Make sure so that those who count the offerings will know what that's going to. And we'll sign you up. Or you can sign up at fellowshipfamily.org. That would be our friends in Liberal right there on the page. Amen Conference. You could just sign up online if you want to use a card. Very easy to do. And I'd encourage even younger men to go. If you have sons or grandsons, probably around 5 or 6 or older, if they could sit through services pretty well, then use your discernment there. There will be 5 different sermons over the weekend. And then obviously you'll want to look at a hotel reservation. Let me know if you're interested in me trying to coordinate that, or if you'd like to take care of that yourself. I know some of you have hotel points and such that you would probably cash in for that occasion. Alrighty, and then a couple other miscellaneous announcements. You might notice in our foyer there's a more of a bare wall than usual, and that's because the Pyramid of Pastors is temporarily taken down. It will return to its place with a slightly different version of that display, but I'm updating that, and that takes about 2 weeks, and so be patient with me there. I'm not a huge fan of just a bare wall with screws on it, but we're going to get that updated here soon, so I didn't want anybody to get any wrong ideas about what's going on there. And then I just wanted to give a shout out to Brother Phillips, who came by yesterday and kind of tacked in our sign out there, temporarily hold it down so it doesn't look like a big monkey got up there and just peeled it off. And we are aggressively looking at pricing options to replace that sign. I mean, even as he was screwing it in, right, Brother Phillips, like wet rotted wood is just crumbling as he tries to fix it. So it really needs an update, and Lord willing, we'll find some good options that are price savvy, that'll look really professional on the front of our building, and so I'm excited about that. And so be praying for that process, and if you've got any connections, you feel free to let me know about that. All right? 1 Kings 12. We are in our series, finally. I don't know if you've ever Googled or found out the answer to this, but one of the best salesmen to ever live was Joseph Samuel Girard. He has the Guinness World Record for selling the most cars in his career. He worked at a Chevy dealership, so some of you may think that's a terrible choice, but I think his pocketbook would say otherwise. From 1963 to 1978, so 15-year career. In those 15 years, Joseph Samuel Girard sold 13,000 cars. That's a lot of cars. If you take the average, Joe is selling about 2 cars a day. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever worked on a car lot. You don't sell 2 cars a day. I mean, you're lucky if you sell one a week. And the number climbs up to 6 a day when you take holidays and weekends into account. On his best day, Joe Girard, which this amazes me because if you've ever bought a car at a dealer, you know it takes forever long, right? It's just absurd how long it takes. You'd think they'd take your money and let you leave real quick. He sold 18 cars on his best day. 18 cars. And 174 cars during his best month. 30 days to a month, 174 cars. I was reading up on him. He was a big believer in writing handwritten notes, and he would write, I think, a note to every customer he ever had every single quarter. Now, when you have 13,000 customers, that's a lot of notes, and he still kept up with it. He got so busy, so many people were trying to buy cars from him that it got to the point where Joseph Girard was you could only buy a car from him by appointment. Think about that. Think about if a salesman was selling so many cars, you had to make an appointment to buy a car from this guy. And he closed 1,400 deals in his best year. By himself, Joe Girard sold more than 90% of all car dealerships in America just by himself. But all the dealerships and all their salesmen, he sold more than 90% of them. And what makes this story incredible is that he really didn't have any bulk customers. He just sold 1 car at a time to 1 person at a time. Now, I don't know how many of you would consider yourself a salesperson. I had a little retail background. I wasn't super good at sales, but I know some of you have had some of that in your career, and some of you would say, I am not a salesperson, but I'm here to break it to you. you're actually a better salesperson than you might think. Because when it comes to decisions, better than a used car salesman, the person that's most convincing when you make decisions in your life is what I would call the salesperson in your own head. Now, you've been there. Come on. Just level with me for a moment. When you're thinking about something you want to do, nobody in the world can convince you as good as you can convince you. And there's nothing like that voice inside your head that begins to convince you and say things like, you really need this. Or, you really deserve this. Or, here's how this would make your life function. In fact, it'd be funny if the same things that you say in your own head were said by a salesperson. You might walk off the car lot, but that person in your head, they stay there forever. And they're selling you and convincing you that you need to make it. And if you've ever been in that, or maybe it's harder to identify it in yourself because we all have our own bias, you've seen it in someone else who's come to you. They've asked your advice or your counsel, one of your kids, one of your friends, and man, they've just wrapped themselves up in something, and they are just utterly convinced it is the best thing to do, and in your mind, as a third party looking outside in, you're like, you're out of your mind. This is foolish. Well, why is that? Because the salesperson in our head is pretty good at the job. Now, I don't put a lot of stock in psychology. I think there's some helpful things about it, some things that aren't helpful about it. But it is helpful to put a name on the salesperson in our head. And psychologists call this term of our ability to sell ourselves on something, they call it confirmation bias. Confirmation bias. I don't know if you've ever heard that term. Confirmation bias would be our human tendency to justify the options we favor when making a decision rather than letting the evidence determine the best decision. Because if we're honest, when we're making decisions about probably the three big things in life, and you could write these at the top of your page and kind of apply it as you go, the three big things we make decisions about are purchases, relationships, and habits. Habits. That a lot of times we think we're weighing the options equally, but the salesperson adds a little weight to the options that we want to weigh a little bit more. And so last week we started a series on decision making, and we talked about the first of the 4 steps of decision making. We talked about widening your options. If you want to make a wise decision, you really need to stop and take a time out for a moment and really realize that there's a lot of times more than 2 options, that we could be a lot like the prophet Samuel, who only looks at the options that are in the room, and wise, discerning people of God expand their options. But today, we're going to look at the problem of confirmation bias, and here's the second step. We're going to cast doubt. Cast doubt on our assumptions and our biases so that we save ourselves from making a really dumb decision. And a great example of confirmation bias in the Old Testament is the prophet Rehoboam. So I want you to see in 1 Kings 12 that Rehoboam was a victim of confirmation bias. Let's look at 1 Kings chapter number 12, and while you're turning there, make sure you're there. I want to give you a little background. Rehoboam inherited a kingdom that was united under his father. How many of you remember who Rehoboam's father was? Solomon, right? Solomon had a united kingdom. And then his father David had a united kingdom, and then Saul had a united kingdom. Now you got to understand, in ancient Near Eastern history, transfers of power didn't happen like they do today. When we see a transfer of power, it's always peaceful in our country. Even, all the hype that surrounded the last 2 presidential changes, didn't compare peanuts to what happened in ancient Near Eastern culture. When a king died, even if he had a named successor who was of his bloodline, there was normally a fight for the throne. The kingdom was often very vulnerable because in their day, The unifying power was not a document like our Constitution. The unifying power was a person, and that person just dropped dead, right? And so it's kind of up for grabs that if you wanted to seize the throne away from the royal family, at a transfer of power was the best time to do it. And in Rehoboam's time, there wasn't just Rehoboam who is the named successor. There was also his brother, Jeroboam. And there was a lot of tension in the kingdom already. You don't see it when you're reading the text a lot of times under the leadership of Solomon, but when he died, it began to reveal itself that the northern part of the kingdom and the southern part of the kingdom had very different views, and they were ready to split. Does that sound a little bit like American history? So any leader with foresight would have come in and thought, okay, this is a really pivotal moment. I've got to handle this right. I've got to come in as a king and be very decisive and make a good decision here. Make the wrong decision, civil war would happen and the kingdom would be divided forever. And when Rehoboam comes into office, here's what we see. Look at verse number 1. And Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel would come to Shechem to make him king. In verse number 3, and they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the congregation of Israel came and spake unto Rehoboam. Do you see how Jeroboam's already kind of the ringleader? Saying, thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore, make thou the grievous service of thy father and his heavy yoke, which he put upon us, lighter, and we will serve thee. And he said unto them, depart yet for 3 days, then come again unto me. And the people departed. Look at verse 6. What does Rehoboam do? It says, and the king consulted with the old men that stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived, and said, how do ye advise that I may answer this people? And they spake unto him, saying, if thou wilt be a servant of this people this day, and wilt serve them and answer them and speak good words to them, then they will be thy servants forever. Now time out. Rehoboam's got a good start, doesn't he? I mean, if you were counseling Rehoboam, and Rehoboam says, hey, I got to make this decision. These people kind of made some demands. What do I do? And he says, go away for 3 days. You know, he's kind of buying his time. Do you see that? That's always a good move. If you could buy your time when making a decision, that's a good move. And so he decides to go consult the people that weren't his friends. He went and consulted with the old men, the people who were his father's advisors, and he thought, these guys will probably know. They were the ones who helped institute this policy that these people are ticked off about, and so I'm going to go talk to them and ask their advice. And so it seems like Rehoboam's using wisdom. He stepped back from his decision. He bided himself some time. We're going to talk about that next week. And that he sought counsel from Solomon's advisors rather than just impulsively making his decision. But the passage reveals kind of a key problem in Rehoboam's decision-making process. He sought counsel from the men, and it immediately, verse 8 happens. Look at verse 8. But he, what's the next word? Forsook the counsel of the old men which they had given him, and consulted with the young men that were grown up with him and which stood before him. Now here's how I read that chain of events. Rehoboam goes to consult with the old men, but he didn't give it much thought. He didn't give it much credit. He forsook the counsel. And then he says, I'm going to go talk to some people that might agree with me. And he says, look, verse number 9. He's talking to the young men. And he said to them, what counsel give ye that we may answer this people? Notice how he says we. He's already identified that they're on his side, that we may answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, make the yoke which thy father did put upon us lighter. And the young men that were grown up with him spake, saying, thus shalt thou speak unto this people. Now, I don't really know where on earth they got this advice from. It seems kind of dumb. But he says, here's their advice. Say unto them, thy father made our yoke heavy. Here we go. The very end of verse 10. My little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins. Verse 11. And now, whereas my father did lade you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. And my father hath chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. That's some pretty hardcore advice from these young men. Now here's, I think, the point of the story, even in its original context, is that Samuel's pointing out, the author of 1 Kings is pointing out, this Jewish historian that would have wrote this, compiled this history, is pointing out that Rehoboam was already sold on the decision before he met with the young men. He forsook their counsel even before he heard what his friends had to say. He had made up. And he fell as a victim to this idea of confirmation bias, where the salesman in your head is the one controlling the decision. And I think all of us struggle with this, don't we? Let's just be honest. We struggle with this, that a lot of times when we look at a decision, we have a tendency, here's how I would say it, and this might be a blank on your handout, that Rehoboam and us, we seek confirmation rather than counsel. We seek confirmation rather than counsel. Now, you all have been around a lot more than I have, collectively as a group. What are some ways that you've seen this show up where you or someone you love or know, they are really just trying to reinforce their decisions rather than genuinely seeking what I'm going to call contradictory counsel? How does that show up? Because we can be really subtle, right? The salesman in our head's very tricky. And we want to have the appearance of honesty, or, we want to think we're being fair with the decision, but a lot of times we aren't. We're stacking the deck. How does that show up? What are some ways that we do that when it comes to making decisions where we or someone else might stack the deck and find ways to reinforce our own biases and our own pre-decision? How does that look? Yep, that's exactly what Rehoboam did. Mark, did you have a thought back there? I know you've been around a lot of decisions. Beth? Yeah? Yep. Yep. Often. Very much. What else? What else? Any other thoughts? I wrote a couple thoughts down. Robert's is great. We seek people who validate our opinion. I'd call it, we curate our counsel. We curate it. I think this one's pretty common. We foolishly seek signs from the Lord. Right? I've seen this show up so many times, but we misread providence. We're like, I got a call, and therefore it must be the Lord, right? Or I was reading in my Bible, and it was talking about this, and because it starts with the letter J, and the place that I'm thinking about working at also starts with the letter J, it has to be from the Lord. Or I saw a Facebook post from heaven. It was heaven's Facebook page, and they said that follow your heart. And so my heart was saying this. Now I'm being a little dramatic, right? But I think all of us, if we're being honest, that shows up a lot. Because in our heart, we want some answer from heaven, because making decisions can be really stressful and you don't really want to mess it up. And they're very pivotal moments in our lives. And so we really want something to just rain down from heaven, and yet it doesn't, right? I would say this, that we avoid seeking counsel at all. We're our own counselor, right? I see this a lot, that a lot of times when people pray about a decision, the prayer is a lot less about, God, would you please send some disconfirming information, right? Where I'm reminded of how Moses prayed, God, I don't want to go without you into the promised land. I don't care. If you're not with me, I'm not going, but a lot of times we ask God to bless a decision rather than seeking his will about our decision. And so here's how I want to finish out the lesson. We're all going to be biased. There's no way, Adam, for you to be less biased than you are. That's just not possible. If you think that you make a decision without a bias, you're very much ignorant, that you carry way more into that than you might credit yourself. And the same with me. And so here's what I personally think. You need a system. You need a checklist. You need something to give you pause to cast doubt on your assumptions and your biases. And I want to give you 2 thoughts and a bonus, okay? Here's 2 practical ways to cast doubt on your assumptions. Number 1, seek opposing counsel to your bias. Look at Proverbs 11. Seek opposing counsel to your bias. Proverbs 11. Proverbs 11:14 says this: where no counsel is, the people fall. No counsel. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. I used to misquote that verse. I used to think it said, in the multitude of counselors, there's wisdom. That's not actually true. In the multitude of counselors, there's safety. A lot of us are familiar with this verse in Proverbs, but I think sometimes we miss the idea behind multitude. The actual word isn't just saying a large number. The idea behind that word multitude is diversity. Diversity. Now think about this with me. I'm going to ask for your involvement once again. Why do you think Solomon encouraged us to seek a multitude of counselors than just a few? Why do you think there's a benefit in seeking diversity in a larger number than just 1 or 2? Why would he say that there's safety in that? Why is there safety in seeking more than one person to counsel you on something? Why would that add safety? Broader perspective, yeah? What else? Sometimes if your pool is limited, it's a lot easier to find people who agree with you. And I've often found sometimes when you're making a decision, this process is still good, even if it seems obvious, because though people may not say, well, that's a totally dumb decision, I would imagine most of you don't have that problem where you're consistently making terrible decisions. It's more that people who see it from a different angle can at least give you a heads up on some factors and some consequences that you haven't thought about before. Hey, yeah, I don't see anything wrong with that, but just understand that this and this are probably going to happen. Are you following me? But here's the other thing too that's been helpful to me is that when you cast your net broadly and you seek opposing counsel and diversity of counsel, you're going to find some patterns and some common ground. You following me? You talk to 5 people or 4 people, you're going to find some common themes of this is a bad idea, but this is a good idea, right? And I think, too, when it comes to seeking counsel, this is kind of a sub-thought, but I think a lot of us underestimate how few people that you know are probably willing to tell you you're wrong. And I've learned to cherish people who will tell me I'm wrong, to at least push. You know, I don't always like it in the moment. I mean, my wife could tell you that. You know, I don't like being wrong. But I've learned that there are a lot of people. I mean, even sometimes your own spouse can be this way, or people that you'd think would be wise. A good counselor isn't just someone who's wise. A good counselor is someone who's wise and is willing to tell you you're wrong. What does the book of Proverbs say? Faithful are the wounds of a friend. And so when you're looking for someone to look for counsel from, listen, a yes man or a yes woman probably isn't your best asset in life. You know? And I think sometimes we even ask counsel of people that are, maybe that's not their personality to tell us they're wrong, or that's not their position in our life to be able to push back on something. And so a lot of times we're going to really have some bad counsel. But wise decision makers don't look for any kind of counsel. Listen, they look for spiritually minded people who are willing to disagree with them and offer an opposing view. And maybe you don't always have a disagreement view. Maybe the decision you're making is just fine and dandy, and everyone's going to say, yeah, that doesn't seem like a bad idea at all. That's quite possible. But at least you know. That's why I think Solomon said there's safety. Here's what I found when making decisions. The more anchor points I have of a person saying, yeah, that seems wise, or that seems like your best option among some options that don't seem like great options, the more people I have that are counseling me who are wise and willing to speak into something that are saying, hey, I don't think you're totally misstepping. The more anchor points I have, the more I feel a sense of safety. That I'm not going to make something that's totally a dumb decision. And at least I know if I've made a poor decision, those people will probably be there to help counsel me through it, right? Because they kind of help me get there. Here's number 2. How do we cast doubt on our assumptions? This is a helpful thought to me. Look for average outcomes. Don't count on being the exception. Here's how this shows. Sometimes the salesman in our head, right? Hey, you got the salesman and then you've got the counter salesman. Hey, you probably shouldn't make that purchase because here's how it'll affect your debt, and here's how the financials of that could work out, or here's how your health will work out after that, or here's how your relationship with your family will work out after that. But here's how the salesman often wins that conversation. Yeah, that happens to some people, but that won't happen to you. Some people will have to go bankrupt, but not you. You've got this and this going for you. Or some people that would affect their relationships, but people understand you better, right? And we think that sometimes, yes, this is how the negative path of a situation could unfold, but I'm going to be the exception because, right? This shows up in a couple different ways. With finances or purchases, right? There's one of those 3 main categories. I know most people get stuck in debt and their interest consumes them, but I won't fall into that trap. Or in a relational decision, it may look like this. I know this person may not be the best influence, but I'll be a positive influence on them. Don't know how many times I've heard that. If I had $1, right, Brother Phillips? Or a spiritual decision. Hey, a lot of times in counseling, hey, probably would help you is set up some pretty strong boundaries just to give yourself a crutch to spiritually walk through this. And a lot of times, here's how people handle that. Well, I can handle this level of temptation. I don't need to set up any boundaries. I'll be okay. There's a sinful tendency in each of us that we think we overestimate our ability to climb out of a problem. And I think that's a lot of times why we make decisions that get us into a problem. Is because a lot of times we overestimate how easy it'll be to climb out of it, and we underestimate how big a hole we'll dig. I want you to put yourself in Rehoboam's sandals for just a moment. Honestly, do you think Rehoboam wanted to split the kingdom? No. So why on earth would Rehoboam do something that on the page just seems so incredibly dumb to us? Right? Here's this large group of people, it says, making demands, which, that itself is kind of a red flag. I understand Rehoboam's concern. They're saying, you better make our yoke easy. And kind of they have this clear leader. We're going to leave. We're going to secede from the union. And here Rehoboam goes and it says, you know what? I'm going to chastise you with scorpions. My father had whips, but he ain't got nothing on me. I've got some scorpions. I'm going to whip you with scorpions. Rehoboam didn't do that, in my opinion, knowing he would split the kingdom. So why would he do that? Here's why I think he did that. Because Rehoboam probably underestimated the likelihood that people would leave. He underestimated the likelihood that Jeroboam had a greater foothold than he thought. And what Jeroboam was going to betray him and set himself up as a king of the northern nation. And so Rehoboam probably thought, yeah, the old men's counsel would be applicable to some other king through this situation. He could be the exception to the rule. And I just want to help you and help myself that whenever those thoughts pop into your mind, just remind yourself. You may write this off to the side of your paper. You are not the exception. You will not beat the odds. You won't. The likely scenario that's going to play out is likely to happen to you. If other people who make that decision and it affects them negatively spiritually and they're never back in church in the same way they've ever been, then it's probably going to happen to you too. And if that decision is a bad financial decision by many people's accounts, and they're warning you and saying this is probably going to be bad for you, it's probably going to be bad for you, right? If a lot of people are saying, hey, we got some younger people in this room, hey, I have some concerns about that person you're dating, they don't see, they're probably not a wholesome, healthy person, right? I've made my way through that stage of decision making. And I can just tell you that there is nobody in your life that is going to go out of their way to say someone's a terrible person or is a bad influence unless they genuinely kind of are. And so when people are speaking into your life and saying, hey, I'm concerned about this friend that you have and this person who kind of seems to have the party life, and I'm concerned that they're going to pull you that way, and you teenagers say, no, that won't happen to me. I love Jesus too much. No, you're probably not the exception. You're probably not the exception. Oh, that boy, all that stuff, you can't count on being the exception. And think about it too. What takes more humility to admit? What seems like more biblical humility? I am the exception. I'm probably not the exception. My flesh is weak. And so I'm probably not going to overcome this in a way that's extraordinary. So I probably should avoid the pitfalls that other people say I should avoid. Right? Here's the bonus. I gave you two. Here's the bonus. It's not in your handout. I got this from another author that I think writes a good book on this. It's framed a little differently, but it has some great thoughts. It's called Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. And I love the way he said this. Ask yourself, really? Just write number 3 and put, ask yourself, really? What do you mean by that, Pastor Mike? What do you mean by saying, ask yourself, really? Ask yourself, why am I being honest with myself, really? Why am I doing this? Really? Why am I avoiding him? Really? Why am I procrastinating this? Really? Why am I accepting this position? Really? Why am I going to this event? Really? Why did I choose to wear that? Really? Why did I choose to lease that? Really? Why do I drive this car? Really? Why did I order that? Really? Why did I move in? Really? Why am I moving out? Really? Do you see if you just stop and say, really? Really, salesman? Is that really why? Because we're really good. You talk to your spouse, hey, I need this because. Really? Do you really? People will they really though? I need this opportunity, but do you really? Life would be better. Really? It's just a simple question, but a lot of times if you allow a counselor into your life to ask that, it can really help your life. So in closing, follow these 2 steps and the bonus to cast doubt on your bias. So seek opposing counsel to your bias. Look for average outcomes. Don't count on being the exception, and ask yourself, really? And I want to apply this because I know a lot of people say, prayer and counsel, that's how you make decisions. Again, to me, those are the way that you do make decisions, but it's helped me personally to have more specificity to how I'm praying about a decision. and more specificity in how I'm seeking counsel about a decision. So I don't just go into a phone call with someone and say, what do you think? But ask your counselor, hey, what's the average outcome of this? What do you see as the result of this decision? Hey, be willing, and a lot of times I felt, even if you put yourself in a room with somebody who maybe would be less likely, sometimes it helps to give them permission. Hey, I want to give you full permission to tell me that I'm absolutely crazy and out of my mind. Can you say that? Is this really true? Is my assumption really true? All right, next week we're going to talk about the power of short-term emotions and how to step back from those. We can't remove ourselves from our emotions, but we can step back and help ourselves a little bit. Let's pray, and then we'll get ready for the morning service. Father, we thank you.